when people have this fear of vulnerability and are running the counterfeit program, it's this thought of, I can't show up as my authentic self. There is some part of me that is flawed, that isn't worthy, that isn't enough. And so I need to hide that part of myself because if I let my true self show, then fill in the blank.
Hey, it's Nikki Llewellyn Gregory, and you're on Gut Plus Science. You're in for a fast-paced, storytelling, action item-rich leadership growth experience. I hope you make this podcast a habit. I consider it a leadership mentoring tool. Learning together makes us better together, and that is how we change the world around us. Let's get to it. Hey, it's Nikki back on Gut Plus Science, and today I'm with my dear friend, longtime partner now, Rosie Ward. And so many times I'm on her show because we do a special courageous leadership series where I get coached. So I'm going to have to remember today. I'm like, okay, I'm here in the hosting seat because we are breaking down an amazing project that you've been working on for so long. I know you have a deep-rooted passion to tap into research-based knowledge and understanding to really work towards transforming meaningful work and changing the statistics on engagement. But this future proofing leadership thing, I mean, there's so much coming, so many different programs, a book, all that. So we're going to break it down and really guide people to your initial piece, which is your white paper today. But I just want to really capture the whole story. So Dr. Rosie Ward, she's the co-founder of Salveo Partners, a best-selling author, and is passionate about combining research-based strategies with real-world, authentic, like that's the thing about Rosie. We actually created a series because of all of these people that kept giving her feedback, her clients. Can you just be in my pocket? Can you just be right here on my shoulder? Because of her authentic ability to tap in and be there for real conversation of what really matters. Like rather than, hey, here's what you're reading in a textbook. No, let's really break this down and make this yours. And she is a wonderful coach and so excited to have her with me today. So Rosie, the future proofing leadership endeavor, let's call it. Give us the background on why. Like I know how much work this has been for you. Like you have tons going on. Why is this something that became such a priority and will be a big part of your future?
One, it's so fun to be here and like actually be on your show for once. So yay. This has been a long time coming. So for those that aren't familiar with our work, our whole focus has been on rehumanizing workplaces and really future-proofing organizations. So the future-proofing leadership is kind of a foundational element of that. But to back up, what we do is we strengthen culture and we level up leaders and teams to more effectively navigate change and disruption. And our world is just disruption to the max. We use the acronym VUCA that I know you love, Nikki, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And our world has been VUCA extreme for years and it's only escalating. And so why that is super important is that the more VUCA our world gets, the more it fundamentally clashes with our biological DNA, our wiring. Because as a species, we are hardwired for safety. We are hardwired for familiarity. We are hardwired for comfort. And what that means is that we tend to cling tightly to the status quo. We tend to avoid discomfort at all costs. It's not because we're being difficult. It's not because we're scaredy pants. It's because we're human. And we could go into the whole, anatomy of the brain and the threat triggers, but just really high level, that's really what we have. And so what I've started to see in our work over the years is the more VUCA our world gets, the more this self-protective, very human instinct is also kicking in. And so when we start to see teams that are having communication challenges, when we see organizations that are having engagement challenges or retention issues, and we start seeing leaders that are not only struggling themselves, but now how do I deal with all the emotions and all the other junk that is coming in with these very human, messy employees? And I don't know how to lead in this environment anymore. And we just started to see this gap widen. And so we didn't have a name for it at the time. Now we call it the stuckness zone. But I just kept seeing this gap widening. And I've been coaching leaders for 20 something years. I started when I was 12. And one of the things that I just started seeing over the years is this pattern of we all tell ourselves stories that keep ourselves safe, but keep us small and keep us from reaching our full potential and keep us from having the impact we want to have, even when we're highly motivated to do so. And as I started working with more and more leaders, and at this point, thousands, I started to see patterns. My brain works in patterns. And so I'd be coaching, let's say, a CEO of a company, and this person would say to me, am I the most screwed up person you've ever had? And because they're being very vulnerable. And I'm like, trust me, I've seen worse, or I'll laugh, or I'll say, no, I've seen like probably 400 people that are just like you. And they'll go, really? And I'm like, trust me, like you're human. And then I would be coaching somebody else and they would say something similar, like, oh my God, like am I just, I'm so messed up. And I'm like, no, you're human. And I'm like, no, I see this. And so I just started like going, God, I've become convinced there's only 8 or 10 of these like limiting beliefs and assumptions that we have that is just at the root of all of this. And so about a year ago or so, well, so I'll back up. This is also why when I started the Show Up as a Leader podcast, I was like, I am going to normalize the messiness of being human because for years I kept hearing all these leaders think it's just them, it's just them, it's just them. And I'm like, no, we're going to make sure it's not just you. And so I ask every single guest on my show, what is a self-limiting story you still tell yourself? And how do you move beyond it so you can show up as a leader? Because I'm like, I'm going to normalize this for people who are listening, who might go, oh, that person has it all together. Newsflash, no, they don't. And so we had 4 years of podcast data of asking that question and years of coaching data since we decided to start analyzing it. So we took about 5 years of data and said, we're going to start to look at what are the commonalities and is there really like core patterns that we can see? And so it took about a year of analysis. Anyone that's ever done qualitative data analysis, it is freaking painful. I'm like, oh, like I want the outcome, but the process is painful. But anyway, what we did is then we identified these, what we call our 7 core faulty programs that we all have that get in our way. And we started testing this out. And as I would present it to audiences, like, oh my God, I feel so seen. Oh my goodness. And so that's really where this came from is we look at if we are going to be future proof in a world that is VUCA extreme, that is not going to get any less VUCA anytime soon. And the more VUCA our world gets, the more we find ourselves trapped in this stuckness zone, the gap between what our world demands of us and our own biological wiring. We've got to do something different. And our typical approach to development in this do more with less and budget cutting era is here, go do a module on LinkedIn Learning, or we're going to do a once a year leadership summit and, get you all excited and then expect that you're going to be off and running. And that's not how we work as human beings. And so what we have found is that when we do the work, which I'm just going to tell people, it's about a 6 to 8 month process. There is not an easy button. There is not a shortcut of doing the upgrade work of those faulty programs. When we get that programming upgraded, then we can do the work to hone the skills on communication, feedback, strategy, et cetera. But what we find is whether someone has literally been a leader for decades or a brand new leader, whether they are a C-suite or an owner or an entry-level leader, or they're an informal leader, because they don't have to have a title to be a leader, that this is a human experience that is shared and people get in their head trash and go, why can't I make progress? It's got to be just me. And I'm like, no, you're human. So stop the freaking head trash. And now let's look at how do we help you move forward and stop the whack-a-mole where you're reaching for all these quick fixes that don't work. And so on an individual and collective level, why I'm so passionate about this is organizations are struggling right now. We have generational gaps, and we could go into whole conversations around that of how are we leading for the future? We have to unlearn and relearn how we led even a few years ago. Leading in a volatile environment is different, and it's bumping people up against that wiring. And we have got to understand that and move through it. Because in a world of AI, the human skills, all of the data is showing it. The human skills are becoming even more important because machines can't build relationships. Machines can't emote. Machines can't do the critical thinking. They can't even adapt as well. So we have got to really level up that human part to effectively integrate in a world of AI. So I know it was very long-winded, but that's the gist of it, really.
Yeah, it's fantastic. And, just going to what you're talking about in the tail end there about AI, going back to this need for Rosie in my pocket, it's like having this guidance that's real and authentic and truly human, aside from the statistics and the frameworks and all of that, so that we're not, yep, checking the box. I reviewed this, completed this course, but like actual application and meeting us where we are as humans with like our own stuckness, right, is really that key to unlock it. And I just want to say thank you for the work that you did for, looking and diving in on 250 leaders. And you were talking about that's a big undertaking. I know that too. I just want to say thank you for that. and helping us to, break down. I think we're going to get into today. You found like 7 themes. They're like these faulty programs of figuring out what's our thing so that we can truly change. Because if we don't find a path, like nothing's ever going to change if we don't find a path for ourselves. So what you've done is taken that research and then helped us to be able to relate and then find the path that's for us to get out of that stuckness zone, right? So before we dive into the 7 core faulty programs and the common improvements that you found and the relationships between the goals and the faulty programs and behaviors and all that, can you touch on the data, the statistics that you found that are like the reason for all of this? I know you touched on it a little bit, but the top of your white paper is like some of these big stats that help us understand like why we have these problems.
Yeah, well, there's longstanding stats and they're debated, but that 60 to 70% of all change efforts fail. We know that 74% of leaders are not well equipped to lead change. We know that 60 plus percent of employees are experiencing change fatigue. We know that leaders are burning out, employees are burning out. So it's this combination of the disruption is going higher and higher. Our capacity to handle change is actually cut in half from what it was in 2019 pre-pandemic. And it's taking its toll, right? We're tired, we're burnt out, we're fatigued, and people just it's like they give up or they reach for those mismatch approaches to change even more so because of that environment. So it's and the stats keep getting worse. Like I think a year ago it was 73% of leaders were not well equipped to lead change and now in 2024 it was 74. So it's like the data's going in the wrong direction. So I love what you said, Nikki, about it's like Einstein's definition of insanity. Let's just keep doing the same thing over and over and expect a different result. It doesn't work. Hence the stats are dismal. And everyone keeps saying we got to lead differently. That I think that a McKinsey article recently talked about that the future of leadership is like VUCA extreme in an AI environment. Like, how do we handle it? And I'm like, yeah, no kidding. And they're even starting to look at this notion that in these volatile environments as human beings, when we need to let go of what is familiar and adapt and lean into flexibility, we are literally unable to do so because of our wiring. So they call it the adaptability paradox. So there's a lot of people that have been noticing this and talking about this. It's not just our research. And it's like, okay, like, so what are we going to do about it is the whole
Yeah.
point.
All right. So let's get off the hamster wheel and let's start with you found these 7 core faulty programs that really then help us as humans to relate to like, that's me. Okay. And so bring that to life, like how you found these themes and break the themes down. Let's go there first.
Yeah, so how we found it was analyzing. So the type of coaching specifically that my firm does with leaders is called immunity to change. And really what that gets into is it's from Harvard, from Bob Keegan and Lisa Leahy. It's a totally transformative process. And it starts with identifying a goal, something you want to get better at, but you can't just will yourself to do, where we fundamentally get in our way, where that adaptability paradox starts to kick in. And then we map out all the different ways that people get in their own way. And then we get to the yuck factor of why. Like, what's the underlying fear, the thing that may not be logical, but feels very real to you, that what's at stake that keeps you stuck in these same patterns of behaviors. And then the last part of this map is really identifying what are those underlying assumptions? What is the filter you have about how the world works or your value proposition that makes it feel necessary to kind of keep this pattern in place? And that pattern is our psychological immune system. So we have this data from leaders on what are they trying to get better at and what is the underlying kind of narrative or assumptions that they have about how the world works that is working against them. And so we looked at all of these maps of like 165 leaders, and then we took the transcripts from the podcast interviews of what's a self-limiting story, because there's a lot of synergy, and then qualitative analysis, it's dumped into spreadsheets, and then you start coding and you start looking for themes and you start looking at frequency and where do they fit in. And that's how we came upon the patterns. It was merging those two data pieces together and then using thematic analysis it's a form of qualitative data. And so that's where these 7 core faulty programs showed up. And then I will say we also identified what we call 3 cousin programs. And the reason why we went back and forth on these, the reason we call them cousins is they didn't show up as high of prevalence as some of the other ones, but they had very specific, unique characteristics of how they got in people's way. And the reason they're cousins is they never showed up by themselves. they always showed up in tandem with one or more of the core faulty programs. So it's important to kind of call those out. And so we look at those separately, but we're like, they're in tandem with this one, or this one. And the other thing that we learned as we looked at the data is very rarely were people running only one faulty program. They usually had multiple ones at play. And of course, the concert of how those interact makes the nuances of how they get in their own way, but there's a lot of similarities. And it was funny, Nikki, because as we were going through this, I mean, here's the deal. Anyone that does this work, facilitates this work, and pretends they have it all together is full of crap, right? Like you talk about
Oh,
the
yeah.
Rosie in my pocket. Like part of it is like, ooh, I need that reminder this week. And so it's like
Yeah.
reminders that we all can lean on. And I share that because as we identified these and I sat back and I looked, I'm like, oh, for the love of God, I've had at least 4, if not 5, maybe all of them. I'm like, well, yep, when I'm in my own way and when I've done my upgrade work. And here's the thing, the upgrade process, to your point, Nikki, is not a one and done. I could talk about, like, if you think about your phone, like if it locks up or your computer locks up and it's not working and you have to temporarily restore it to factory default settings and then re-upgrade it, it's kind of like our brains work the same way. There are times where, God dang it, we're going to default to factory settings. But then if we've done the initial hard work of the upgrade process, then the re-upgrade later is not as hard to do because we've got these tools we can lean on to guide that. So it's kind of navigating a dance of like, I've upgraded, oops, I got a glitch, I got to re-upgrade again. Like it's an ongoing thing. So I just want to put that out
Yeah.
there. So
I think that's great. And I wanted to share that, when I first dove into your research, I was like, there's a similarity here in what I had learned with Karpman's drama triangle that really helped me find a route to, oh, this is a theme, a pattern, a story that is showing up in my life consistently. I went through a coaching program with that. I think what this is similar, but it goes a lot deeper, particularly with like the cousin interaction. So let's dive into these a little bit. I feel like we could talk about it all day and we have to
we
have
could,
some
we
limits.
could,
So
we could.
so maybe kind of talk through like, let's figure out how to summarize this, but you have found that there are some that like from a percentage perspective, there's some that are much heavier that more people probably relate to than others.
Yeah. So we'll go through the top 4 maybe.
Yeah, that sounds great.
Yeah.
Let's do it.
So the top one, by far the most common, we call the counterfeit. And the counterfeit is basically where we fundamentally have a fear of vulnerability. And that can look like, I don't want to appear weak, or really, if you think about what is the definition of vulnerability, it's leaning into uncertainty, risk, and emotional exposure. When people have this fear of vulnerability and are running the counterfeit program, it's this thought of, I can't show up as my authentic self. There is some part of me that is flawed, that isn't worthy, that isn't enough. And so I need to hide that part of myself because if I let my true self show, then fill in the blank, all kinds of bad things. Someone might fear rejection, someone else might feel this, but it's this fundamental need that I have to hide parts of myself, that I have to put on the mask, I have to put on the armor, and then I have to prove that I'm worthy. I have to prove that I'm enough. And so you can imagine it shows up in a whole host of behaviors that externally in organizations, people might be like, great, that person is a star performer. They're productive. I see this the most in the most quote unquote successful people. If you go by external definitions of status or money or role or responsibility, they run this big time. And because there's a part of them that is like, yeah, but if I really like let them know that I like this, or I let myself be vulnerable, or I let them know I don't have it all together, then like people are going to lose respect, they're not going to listen to me, etc. So that's the counterfeit, which is by far the most common. I will say this is fundamentally separate from a cousin program we call the fraud. The fraud program is where imposter syndrome comes in. And the reason I share that, Nikki, is that this is one that in 100% of cases, everybody who is running the fraud programming also runs the counterfeit, but not everybody who runs the counterfeit has the fraud. And so a lot of times we use this, we throw out imposter syndrome kind of flippantly, but it's a very specific mindset. And so the difference when someone has the fraud programming, the cousin, is it's taking a step further beyond, oh my gosh, I have to hide my authentic self. There's an underlying fear of being found out. And so when we're running the fraud program, it goes a step deeper of, and they're going to find out they made a mistake. They're going to find out I'm really not qualified. It's like, I'm going to be found out. And therefore I have to hide that. I have to overcompensate for it. Where most people who have the counterfeit don't necessarily have that, I'm going to be found out. It's just there's something fundamentally wrong and they're hustling for their worth. They're proving their worthiness. They're proving they're enough. but there is a small percentage that also have that fraud programming. So that was one that was a complete one-to-one correlation, that one always showed up with the counterfeit
Mm.
programming. So that's
And
the most common.
yeah, wow. Well, I want to now connect the dots on I'm like, okay, we're going to talk about the path to get off the hamster wheel, right? And if we go back to you said in the beginning, we're throwing out like, here's this LinkedIn learning course. Everything of what you're sharing right now, which is the four we're going to talk about, we've only talked about counterfeit. If we choose to believe that all humans want to be a good human, like they want to be a great leader, right? We talked about the roots being like these faulty programs, but let's take the roots like so much deeper to like, where did this all start? The story started maybe at 3 years old, maybe even younger, 7, right? There's stories. And so to think that we can throw a LinkedIn program or a learning program at this and change the path and the direction, I mean, the roots are so deep in this, right? Just wanted to see if you want to comment there.
Well, yeah, the roots are I use 10 as a just a general because there's a lot of research that talks about the first 7 years are what they call our imprint period. What Bob Keegan and Lisa Leahy have found in the immunity to change and building that psychological immune system is that you can actually go up to years 15 or 16. So I just use 10 because it's like in the middle. But really, in those first 10 years of our life, our brains are downloading programming from our lived experiences. So either something actually happened to us or we observed it in our surroundings. And that programming gives us the rules of the road. It tells us when we're going to be rejected, when we're going to be accepted. It tells us what is right, what is wrong, when to speak up, when to be quiet. And that programming serves a very critical core function. It is designed to help us feel in control, feel accepted, find love and belonging. And our brains are on high alert for threat for anything that might challenge that. So we've got this whole, set of research on the reward and threat centers of our brain. And so why that is important is what I always say is what you have to recognize that most of our reactions that are happening today is not adult version, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60-year-old version of us. It is that 10-year-old version of ourselves having a reaction. So if I suddenly if my counterfeit programming is getting activated, there was something in those early years of my life that I created that narrative that I have to prove my worth and belonging. That maybe I was in a family where I only got praised when I achieved or whatnot, or maybe I wasn't included in a friend group, or there was something that happened in the neighborhood where you weren't picked for the team. It's these simple things that imprint and stick with us, and we create a narrative about our sense of worthiness and our sense of belonging in this case for the counterfeit programming. And so then if we perceive that, oh my gosh, like if I let my real self show, someone's gonna reject me, or they're not gonna invite me to the table, or they're gonna think less of me, then I'm gonna hide that part of myself. And in that moment, when I choose to do that, it's not conscious, it's happening on the subconscious level. I'm not showing up as a 50-year-old woman. I'm showing up as a scared 10-year-old version of Rosie in that moment. And so we basically have a bunch of the more VUCA our world gets, if there's one thing people can take home to just keep in mind, that it's basically a bunch of 10-year-olds right now running around in our society and our organization that are hijacked in that self-protective. Like, I don't know about you, but I would not let a 10-year-old make decisions for our business. I wouldn't let a 10-year-old make major decisions for our household. I wouldn't let a 10-year-old drive my car. But that's what is happening right now. And so we have to recognize that and give ourselves and our neighbors and our colleagues a little bit of grace and think about like, what does your 10-year-old self need to hear right now? Is there like a Rosie in my pocket? My 10-year-old self needs a regular reminder of you don't have to be perfect. You are enough. You matter just as you are. Well, what does your neighbor's 10-year-old self need to hear? And we have to just start getting off of this judgy, crappy behavior that gets instinctively activated in us. And it's not because we're bad people. I don't think people wake up in the morning and go, I'm going to be a difficult butthead today. But that faulty programming gets activated and we behave in all kinds of unproductive ways. So to your point, Nikki, if we don't start to know which of those programmings are running us and name it, naming it gives it right off the bat, gives it less power. Oh, that's just my counterfeit programming. But then have tangible steps of how do I counter that narrative and poke holes in that programming. That's a very intentional step. And if we don't recognize that's happening, we can gain all the knowledge in the world. Knowledge is not what's needed. Transformation is what we need. And we skip the transformation part because it's messy and it takes too long.
Yeah. Wow. Well, and because I've dove into this research. I have the report up here, and I know you and I have talked about it in our coaching sessions. I'll just kind of highlight a couple of examples and have you play with this for a second. So, the perfectionist is one of them, one of the top four, right? And I think I had shared with you that I grew up with a mom who had always had straight A's. She used to show me her report cards, and good for her. She was a really good academic. I was more of like a street smart person, still am, not a good test taker or whatever, and was always compared to the A's on the report card, whether she really meant to do it. I don't think it was like I'm intentionally trying to damage my daughter, but me trying
She's
to
trying to
compare
motivate you
myself.
probably. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. It was all in good-hearted, inspiration, but for a long time, it was I am always striving for the A, which probably runs the line of my overachiever stuff too. But I've fought for years. I had this awareness to understand that perfectionistic tendencies were in me, right? Because of my younger years. And I work so hard to always fight against it because I don't want to be that because I know how I felt. And so on the perfectionistic side, I don't struggle with that one as much, but it still creeps up. Overachiever, on the other hand, which is one of the top four, definitely always
Oh
struggling
god,
with that.
that one of all of them, because I've had perfectionist, I've had counterfeit. I will tell you, Nikki, that overachiever is one, and I'm writing about this in our forthcoming book, is the one that I still like. I have to ongoing upgrade or on because that one just it's so deeply ingrained. And again, I grew up in a household, youngest of five girls, overachieving family, grades, this and that, and it was one again. I don't think my parents were intentionally trying to be jerks or anything, but it was one of those where I was always compared to my older sisters. I had different interests and felt like so I had created a narrative that in order for me to be accepted, which is where a little bit of the counterfeit comes in, but I had to be more like my sisters. And then I had to be the best at everything. I had to be captain of dance line and first chair in band and this and this and this and this, trying to get accolades. And so the overachiever, I'm going to take on more, take on more, take on more, because you think if you achieve enough, if you get enough stuff done, that somehow you're going to feel enough, right? And it doesn't ever happen. All you do is get burnt out and resentful and crabby.
Yeah,
Yeah,
totally.
yeah.
Okay, so Rosie, we've talked about, I think, three of the top four so far. We talked about counterfeit, highlighted perfectionist, overachiever. What's the fourth most
The
popular?
other one is control freak. And so many people cringe at this one, even though like, oh, because they don't want to admit it. But the control freak is the other common one. And here's what I will say is control freak, we say it a little bit lightheartedly, but the place control freak comes from, they fundamentally fear uncertainty. And so when control freak is running us, we struggle greatly in a VUCA world because we want a level of certainty and predictability that just doesn't exist. And where the control freak comes from is there's a sense, again, from those early years, let's say those 10 years of our life, where if somehow I was more in control of the situation and more responsible, if somehow I ensured things go the right way, that I can prevent bad things from happening. So it's actually coming from a place of like noble intention subconsciously, and it's coming from a place of like protectiveness. But it comes across then as I'm going to hijack conversations, I'm going to hijack processes because it's this deep need of no, like I have to be the conductor because I am bearing the weight of the world on my shoulders on a subconscious level. Sometimes people are conscious about it, but it's really this deep burden of no, things have to happen the right way. Things have to happen a certain way, the way that I imagine it in my head, or bad things can happen. So they're not intentionally trying to be rigid. They're not intentionally trying to be difficult, but that's how it shows up.
Yeah. Well, and I think to your point about we don't want a bunch of 10-year-olds running our company. So all of us have the tendency to be the 10-year-old, right? We all have these and they're never going away. Like the perfectionistic thing, I don't struggle with it like I used to. I still have those things, but I've learned the triggers, the things of awareness. I've learned to nip it like, wait, what am I doing here? Right. Whereas with the overachiever, I don't feel like I'm as far down the road. I'm still like trying to prove that this was really valuable. And like, oh my, I can take a break in the afternoon. It's okay. Like I have to talk. It's so much more consciously a muscle that I'm building. Right. And so I think that that's the point is, in leadership, leaders are guiding the rest. They're the ripple effect on everyone else. And in order to change these statistics, it is awareness mixed with toolbox, mixed with regular application, mixed with some version of a Rosie in your pocket. it's so much deeper, like what we have to do to like be able to overcome, and seasons knock us off, right? Like you're gonna have something in your life that like brings back the perfectionistic thing, and you got set back even though you thought you were ahead, right? It's this constant effort and working on this root stuff. So
Well, 100%. Well, and here's the thing, Nikki, just if you take that example. So in the white paper, we get into all the goals like that people are working on and the most common goals. And I know we don't have time for that today, but here's just a really critical part when we talk about our kind of propensity to try to find the easy button and a mismatched solution. So let's just take people who have, I'm going to pick another one, martyr programming. So martyr is where we actually fundamentally are taking on burdens of other people, either because we don't want to appear selfish or it's hyper independence. Like we fear being dependent on other people because we either think they're going to let us down or they're not reliable. So, again, think about martyr. We just take on all these burdens ourselves and we squash down our own needs and then we end up becoming resentful. Well, what we found in our analysis that was really not surprising, but it was eye opening at the same time is 100% of people with the martyr programming are trying to get better at boundaries. Think about that. They're also trying to get better at time management. And time management is calendar management, working on the business versus in the business, honoring time for reflection, honoring time for prep. It's all that. Well, think about this, Nikki. What do we do usually when someone talks about, like, oh, I need to be better at time management? We give them a tip sheet. We send them to, I'm picking on LinkedIn Learning, but pick any kind of LMS module. Here's all the tips and tricks of how do you manage your calendar. There's great productivity classes that have wonderful ways of how do you use your Outlook or how do you use Google Suite, whichever platform you're on, to be more productive and more efficient. If I have a martyr programming that tells me that I cannot advocate for my own needs, that I cannot say no if somebody sends me a meeting invite, that tells me that basically trying to leverage my calendar in an effective way, something bad's going to happen. You can start to see that martyrs. And so it's funny because I was doing a session with some leaders recently, and I looked over to the group of martyrs because I asked them to rank them and their top one, and I just looked over at the people with the martyr as their top one, and I said, "My guess is you all struggle with your calendar and boundaries." And they're like, "How do you know?" And I'm like, "Because from our data, 100% of you are trying to get better at that, but you fundamentally, for some reason, cannot do it." Or you talk about, people with people pleaser is another program. Well, they struggle with growth feedback conversations. And guess what? The majority of people running that are actually trying to get better at growth feedback and accountability, but there's something getting in their way. Well, newsflash, when you have a people pleasing underlying faulty program, all the classes in the world on crucial conversations is not going to help you until you upgrade that programming.
yeah. And if you think of this lived out, like I'm thinking, okay, in a large workplace that struggles with like, gosh, we just can't get over the hump with developing these right leaders. We've got so much turnover, it's chaotic around here. It's like, it's really giving leaders a personalized Rosie in my pocket, if you will, plan for their individual development. And okay, this is where you're stuck versus Sally, your colleague, or Fred, your colleague. And you see this particular topic on your calendar for your development, your coaching, and you're like, awesome. Because it speaks to you, because it's for you, right? Versus the here's what the company wide all leadership team is doing. It really gives us this personalized roadmap. Gosh, there's so much here. I feel like every time I talk to you, it's like, okay, well, here's another series, right? Like so much to learn from you. I think before we transition over into our lightning round, there was this single behavior that you found that something about in the research report, a single behavior leaders see as critical to creating more human workplaces. Tell us more about
Oh,
that.
yeah. So that was a question from our podcast that we asked every single guest. We wanted to know. So the closing question in my podcast, since we've been on People Forward Network, is if you could challenge leaders everywhere to practice one behavior that would create more human workplaces and equip everyone to show up as a leader, what would that be? And we wanted to kind of see, again, what are some of those themes? What are they seeing basically as the future of work from these very effective leaders that we have interviewed. And so what was really interesting is what we found out is that the majority of leaders really think that we're calling it human-centered leadership practices, but most of them talked about building genuine, caring relationships, leading with the heart, checking in on people authentically, tending to people before jumping to tasks. So if you think about like 38% of people said that is the future of leadership, Well, okay, that's fine. And guess what? If I'm an overachiever and I'm running on productivity, that's actually going to be really hard for me to do. And the next tide is they said being authentic and vulnerable and embracing calm. So it's managing that reactivity, being curious, etc. All of those fall into, I don't know, I would call it the quote unquote soft skills, which I hate that term. We got to call them power skills and essential skills. But it's basically all of that human stuff that, again, in a world of AI, nothing can replace that. And so, of all these leaders that we've interviewed that talk about what is the future of leadership, it is these human centric skills that are super, super critical that we have to level up. And it's hard to do that when we have faulty programs getting in our way. So, it has to be a both and as we look at how we approach it.
Well, and if you look at those two that you just shared, like relational connection, human connection, and like vulnerability, authenticity, and you think this research and these terms, the names that we've given these for conversations that help us like feel seen, right? As a leader, when you really start to understand these, yes, you know yours and you've got your personalized plan for how you're working to develop and overcome and get out of the stuckness, but it creates such a meaningful language to be able to connect with your people. And it is doing the relationship building and the vulnerability too. So it's another version of like a ripple effect. That's really cool. I can't wait to see like just the stories that come out of this of transformation, not just for the leader, but how the leader then ripple effects on someone that's new in the organization, maybe new in, their career, and them being able to have that gift from that leader early on. Wow. Like
Well, and
it's
that's what
it's so
yeah,
cool.
100%. And so one of the things, because we look at future ready leadership from two lenses, future proofing leadership within your organization at the collective level and within yourself. And so we talk a little bit about that in the white paper, and the book is obviously going to go more in depth. And to go along with the book, we're actually creating a faulty program assessment that will help you kind of know, and it's going to be free. It's going to go with the book, but it'll give a common language of, oh, here I am. Okay, I can watch out for it. I can name it. And then, like to your point, how does that guide my path? And we also really believe that that individual work is critical, but we also have to have team group based work where we develop core and common language and tools, to your point, kind of the Rosie in my pocket. But how do we have language to get us back in check? How do we support one another in a meaningful way, speak the same language, et cetera? And then how do we have the systems that surround it and reinforce it? And so with the new book, we're also creating what we call our future ready leader scorecard, where you look at those three elements: individual development, look at the group team based dynamics, language, tools, et cetera. Because one of the key indicators that culture change has been adopted across the group is you start to see the use of a core language and you start to use, regularly. And then we look at the systems. And so those are going to be forthcoming, heads up, with the book. So
So much good to come alongside this. Right now, we have the white paper as this episode, will be released. We've got that white paper, but the book is coming in many different programs. So I have a feeling we'll be using this episode for a long time to come.
yay.
So Rosie and I, we have had a lot of fun together since we've known each other. I feel like I've known you way longer than I have, but we're probably going on what, maybe 4 years of knowing each other. And I'm like, okay, Rosie, so I have this section on Gut Plus Science where it's like new stuff that I get to learn. So before we hopped on, I was like, okay, I just need to prod a little bit so that I can figure out some things, but I don't want to know about it. I just want to know what we're going to talk about. So, okay. I don't know if you know this, but I love to rap. One of my favorite songs is Shoop. Every single word. And it brings me so much energy. But there's something about Rosie somehow somewhat connected to Spinderella and a new understanding of being like with what 2 degrees of separation or something. Like what tell me. Come on.
Yeah, so a few years ago, of all things, I was actually at a recertification conference for the YOS tool, YOS discovery tool we use. And at the time, their offices were across the hall from this holistic wellness center that they do personal training, but they also had like red light therapy and pulse therapy and all kinds of stuff. And we got this incredible discount to go have some services done. And my back was bugging the crap out of me. And I hate being cold. I live in Minnesota, but I hate being cold. And the guy, I can't remember his name now, but he was like convincing me, no, you should do, like, I call it the cryogenic freeze chamber. I don't know, but athletes and stuff use it. I get it. It's supposed to get down inflammation, but I'm like, I don't like being cold. And it's like negative, I don't know, 180 degrees. And he said, no, but you know what? Here's the deal. Like, it's only 3 minutes. And he convinced me that I should do that and then do this other therapy.
It's the
So,
longest 3 minutes of your life.
oh, for the love of God, right? So long story short, it's this pod you stand up in. The outfit they put you in is questionable. That's another story. But anyway, we're standing there and he's like, well, we can pipe in music. And I'm like, oh, yes. And then I'm like, do you got any salt and pepper? In my head, I'm like, okay, 3 minutes. Push it is like 3 minutes and 14 seconds. I know that from, and I was like, yeah, like, can we do that? Like, that'll get me through. And he starts laughing and he's like, my cousin used to date Spinderella. And I was like, so you're telling me right now that I'm tutoring. So then it was funny because he's like, you can just knock on the wall, like if you need to get out. And I was like, do I have to
Mhm.
stand still or can I dance? And he's like, you can dance. So I get to like the first 45 seconds and then I'm doing like, okay. And then I was like, oh, I gotta dig in. So I'm like, yo, 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 baby, pop. Yeah, you come here, give me a kiss. And I'm trying. And I was like, I made it the full 3 minutes. And he's like, damn, I go, well, I can't let Spinderella down.
Oh my gosh, that's awesome. Okay, quick follow-up question there. Would you ever get in a cryo tank again?
And now that I've done it once, I think I would, because I will say my back did feel really good at first, but
Did
that was
it?
woo, painful. I don't know if I
Okay.
could do the plunge, because
Yeah.
but being dry and cold was probably different
Yeah.
than being wet and cold. I don't know. So there
Okay.
we go.
Okay. I've always said like I don't see myself ever trying that because I'm like you. I'm like no cold. But on the flip side, I think I definitely relate over here to what you were sharing earlier about like channeling your inner mermaid. Now, mermaids, warm weather, warm water. Tell us more about like mermaid. What does this mean to you?
Besides they're sparkly, which we know sparkle is my favorite color, and mermaids are very fun and sparkly. But no, I think I was a mermaid in a former life because you were asking me like where I don't know I like to go or if I have a special place, and I don't have a specific place. But for me, why I say I think I was a mermaid in a former life is you get me near water, and you get me sunshine, and it is just like boom. It like brings me to a beautiful halt, and I am clearly go 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 high energy, and there's something about that that is a reset for me, and like people don't believe it because I can sit on our boat for 4 hours and not move. I can sit like, I'm like, nope, you get me near water and sun, and I become like catatonic in a beautiful way.
Yes. Oh my goodness. Yes. Well, let's both hold each other accountable as recovering or working through our overachiever selves. We both have boats. We both like that is the place that I've said for so long. When I'm on there, I think of nothing. I'm not thinking about what's due or whatever. It is the place that takes me away. So we'll be accountability buddies and let's swap pictures of our boating
Yes.
experiences this next
Selfies on the
season.
boat. I love it. I love it.
Yeah. And then finally, I know some people know this about you, but I definitely think it's just such a cool thing. And we talked about it from a bucket list. Check it off. You not only have met Brene Brown, but you do work alongside Brene Brown. Tell us just a little bit more about that.
Yeah, you asked bucket list, like what's a bucket list item I can check off? And I was really fortunate to be amongst a group of amazing people in 2019 where we trained for 3 days with Brene to be one of her Dare to Lead facilitators. And then have since moved over as they're building this new Daring Leadership Institute in partnership with Better Up and moved over with that group. And we, get to have regular Zoom meetings with Brene and just her wisdom and watching how she navigates this VUCA environment is just a freaking masterclass and just learning from her with this other amazing group of people is just like I just soak it up and I just feel very honored to be a steward of her work out with organizations and what this next iteration is going to look like. It's pretty cool. I pinch myself and I'm like, what an honor to be in that community and to be one of the people who is entrusted and as a steward of her baby. It's amazing. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. And I have one other friend that has been through, I don't know if it's the exact same programming with Brene, but I mean, that's a very selective thing. Like she takes it very seriously on who she picks to be able to work with in a partnership like that. And so just high five, way to go. It was such a cool thing to check off the bucket list.
It's
Love
very cool.
learning
Yeah.
from you. Well, thank you so much for being here today, Rosie. And then we're going to be linking out to the white paper. And then as this episode lives out in the world for many years to come, we'll be linking out the book and all of that around future proofing leadership. So thank you so much for being with me today. It's
So
awesome.
fun. Thank
All
you.
right. Thanks for bringing the sparkle.
Yay.
Rosie, it was so fun being with you today and breaking down this massive project that you've undertaken with your team at Salveo Partners, future proofing leadership. We are going to be talking about that for a while. We scratched the surface, but I think we did a great job today understanding the why of this research and the key learnings. We talked about the 7 core faulty programs. We didn't get to touch on all of them, but we talked about some of the most popular and the cousins. We talked about the common improvement goals of leaders, what we're striving for. and how those relate to our individual like faulty program and how to really get unstuck. That was helpful. Got a good start there. And then we talked about the single behavior or behaviors. We ended up talking about two core behaviors that leaders see as critical to building more human centered workplaces. And this was a really powerful episode. We're so excited to be able to share this research project with you that Salveo Partners has been working on for 250 leader conversations and all of this qualitative and quantitative data. So make sure that you grab the future proofing leadership white paper that is linked in the show notes. You can also visit Salveo Partners and see all the things that are happening. Follow Dr. Rosie Ward on LinkedIn. This is just, again, scratching the surface of this amazing research and the guide that they're creating to help us get unstuck. So thank you so much, Rosie. We'll see you next time.
We just left the world a little bit better. Now, go do something with it.